Put it on the full view.
Okay, we'll call our meeting, our joint meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. You got Wendy's instructions for the meeting. So since we have so many people in the meeting and we're on a Zoom screen, we can't see you all on one screen. So we're going to ask you to use the chat function. So if you have questions or you want to speak, we have a way of recognizing you. Usually when we just have the council, we only have 7 people on there that can raise their hands, but we can't see you all. So a little bit of housekeeping about tonight's meeting before we get started is we have a hard set 45 minutes for this meeting. The council is going to have to dial into another meeting at 7 p.m. for the council workshop this evening. So we're going to try and give everybody enough time to click off and dial back into the next meeting. We want to thank both the Parks Commission and the Planning Commission for the communication that they've sent to the council, which I think was the impetus for spurring this joint meeting. It occurred to Paul and I that to have a joint meeting to understand the roles of the commissions and all of the great work the volunteers do to advise and inform the council would be very timely. We're going to start up. So we have three different segments of the meeting this evening. And if you have questions, we'll stop after each segment and see if there's any questions in chat for that segment. And first, we're going to start off. Paul's going to give us an overview of just how the planning process works for the city of Arlington. For some of you, this will just be a refresher, and others, hopefully, it'll be some new information that will help this very complicated process make sense. And then we're going to hear from the chairs of the Arts and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission as they explain how they view their roles to the City Council. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep.
All right. So we'll throw it over to Paul for the first segment.
All right, thank you, Mayor. As the mayor said, I'm just going to give a high overview of how planning works. And it mainly has to do with the comp plan, because our comprehensive plan is our guiding document for planning in the city. Oh, yeah, we better back up.
I'm sorry, I forgot the roll call for this meeting, which we need to start with since it is an official meeting. So I'm going to interrupt Paul and ask Ashley to take the roll.
Okay, can everybody hear me correctly? Clearly? All right,
Yep.
First we're going to start with City Council, and I'm going to start with Mike Hobson.
Here.
Marilyn Early.
Here.
Deborah Nelson.
Here.
Dawn Fanny.
Here.
Jan Schweddy.
Here.
Jessica Stickles.
Here.
Michelle Blythe. She's on but muted.
Michelle, you're muted if you're trying to say you're here.
I don't see her. Did she remember?
Her face up there. Her video, so you can see her. But we'll come back to her. Starting with moving on to Planning Commission, I have Tim Dean.
Here.
Bruce Angel. I said the last name correctly.
Yeah, they're in the CED room and it's on mute.
All right, Mike Thomas. Jan Berg.
Here.
Yvonne Gallardo.
Here.
And moving on to Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission, I have Heather Logan.
Here.
Barb Butner.
Here.
Brittany Conman.
Here.
Clayton Conway.
Here.
Jennifer Egger. Jennifer Harrington.
Here.
Steve Maish.
Here.
Thank you, Ashley. We'll turn it back over to you, Paul.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
I wanted to let you know I did hear from Michelle that she's having issues connecting and she's restarting her computer and she'll try logging in again.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. We got so excited to get started. We missed roll call. As I was saying, I'll just do a brief overview of how planning works. It revolves around our comprehensive plan. That's our guiding document for the city. I'll start with the Parks Commission. The Parks Commission serves as an advisory commission to the City Council in respect to parks, arts, recreation, facilities, and programs within the city. Also with expansions, new acquisitions for both parks, facilities, and programs. The Parks, Arts, and Recreation Committee takes a tour of our park space annually, makes recommendations on maintenance and improvements to the facilities. Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission also maintain the Parks Master Plan, which is incorporated into the comprehensive plan. Our Planning Commission serves as the advisory body to the council on matters of zoning, planning, and also acts as our design review board. Planning Commission reviews new development projects for compliance with city code and our comp plan. Both contribute to the development and implementation of our comprehensive plan. However, the Planning Commission is chiefly responsible for the plan. So just a little bit of history on how the comp plan was developed. So the legislature enacted the Growth Management Act, known as the GMA, in 1990 to guide and coordinate local planning. The GMA requires cities and counties to develop and keep current a comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a document that outlines the city's policies, goals, and implementation strategy for future growth and development within the city, looking at a 20-year horizon. Although the plan looks at a 20-year horizon, we update it every 8 years. And so that's where the council the Planning Commission get mainly involved. There's actually 14 elements to the plan, to the comprehensive plan. Some of these elements are combined into one section. So you look at the city's comprehensive plan, you may not see all 14 sections, but if you read the sections, all 14 elements are identified in it. Urban growth, reducing sprawl, transportation, housing, economic development, property rights, permitting, natural resources, open space, parks and recreation, the environment, citizen participation and coordination, public facilities, historic preservation, and consistency with other plans. That's kind of the consistency with other plans. I wanted to highlight that. That's kind of a catch-all in there, but some cities have some unique points that others may not have, and so for Arlington, the airport is a unique item that not all cities have. But part of the comprehensive plan is to ensure that the airport master plan and the comprehensive plan both are on the same, kind of the same level. Some other concepts that the council is probably familiar with that I just wanted to bring up so that it made sense in the context of what we're talking about is buildable lands. So we know cities and counties that are within growth areas identified by the state get population projections from the Department of Financial Management once a year, once a year prior to the comprehensive plan development. Jurisdictions use the information to develop the housing plan and diversity to accommodate the growth projected for their area. Another concept is the countywide planning policies. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and it's one of the chief reasons that SCT was developed in the 90s was to help make that connection. Counties must develop and maintain countywide planning policies in cooperation with the cities to support countywide issues such as the growth, UGA expansion, and public facilities. And the last one I wanted to speak about was a process that we go through every year. That's our docketing process. Arlington has a docketing process that allows public and city the submissions annually to be reviewed. The docket process ensures that changing circumstances that warrant change in policies, zoning, or projects have adequate consideration to keep our comprehensive plan viable. The Planning Commission is tasked with reviewing the docket submittals with staff support, ensuring the consistency with the goals and policies of the comp plan, the Arlington Municipal Code and providing public comment during the public hearing portion. The Planning Commission submits their findings to council in the form of the facts and findings that are formally adopted by the Planning Commission during a public meeting. So that's kind of a really high overview of how planning works in the city. And happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, give anybody a minute if they're putting their questions in the chat.
Deborah had her hand up.
No, but we're asking people to
I
use
know.
No.
I'll be good.
Okay, and we can ask questions at the very end of our presentations as well, too. If it's taking you a minute to get through the chat. See, I do have a question. Question is when did the process begin in Arlington?
When did the process of comprehensive plan?
Is that you asking about the comprehensive plan process, Deborah?
Yes, the length of the history, is it like 1903?
That's a good question. You know, I never really looked at it before the GMA took place, but we formalized it when the GMA took place in 1990. That's when it became a requirement.
1992.
There you go.
Our historian is here.
Yeah.
We do have staff members who oversee the Parks, Arts and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission with us this evening. We appreciate that you made the time to come as well. So the next item on the agenda is the Planning Commission role. And for this, I'll call on the Chair of the Planning Commission, Tim Dean.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Administrator Ellis and City Council members, Parks Commission and fellow Planning Commissioners. Thank you, Paul, for bringing up what you did. Can you hear me okay? You can, okay. What I want to do tonight is just to kind of give the role of Arlington's Planning Commission. And the municipal planning commissions are authorized by state law under RCW 35.63. And Arlington's Planning Commission was created in 1943 and codified by AMC 2.52.010. And our responsibility is to advise on legislation created to the city's comprehensive plan and land use code. This responsibility has two parts: process and content. Process describes how things are done. Is it supported by our comprehensive plan? Does the proposed legislation conform to growth management, regional and county planning frameworks? Has it followed required procedures? Content describes the intent of the proposed action. Does it conform to the vision articulated in the adopted comprehensive plan? Does it accomplish the intended purpose? Have we looked at unintended consequences? Is it internally consistent? Now, for the process, except for emergencies, the process that we follow for comp plan and land use issues is always the same. Staff prepares the necessary documentation related to the proposed action, whether it is a private or a city request. The proposed action is forwarded to the Planning Commission along with supported documentation. Items are typically first heard at a commission workshop. Items are then deliberated at the next regular commission meeting. Comp plan amendments and land use issues, AMC Title 20, items typically require a public hearing at this meeting. A vote is then taken on recommendation. Commission forwards its findings and recommendations back to staff. Staff forwards commission summary, findings of fact, and recommendations along with staff reports to council for action. At that time, council can affirm commission recommendation, deny commission recommendation, modify commission recommendation, or remand back to commission for further consideration. Affirming a recommendation back decisions are clear to us and do not require explanation. However, if our recommendation is denied or modified, it creates a difficult gap in our understanding of council's intent. Without feedback loops, it becomes impossible for us to anticipate council's direction. Based on PARC Commission response to a recent council decision, we are not alone in this concern. When it comes to content, in meeting our responsibility to advise council, we think our most important function is to be the city stewards of the comprehensive plan. There's a good reason why terms are 6 years. It takes time, effort, and commitment to understand the planning landscape concepts and legal framework. With long terms of service, the city has at least one commissioner, and if we're lucky, perhaps multiple commissioners who can span the interval between updates and help carry the vision forward. We track annual comp plan updates to ensure compatibility with existing elements and that the update decisions don't unintentionally drive our planning process off path prescribed by council. There is a hierarchy of local planning and regulatory documents. Our comprehensive plan is at the top of the list, followed by our land use code and all the documents included by reference. The state requires that land use regulations are reflective of and consistent with the approved comprehensive plan. In fact, all locally adopted planning documents are required to be compatible with our comprehensive plan. There is a long list of planning documents that are part of the comp plan by reference, including but not limited to our airport master plan and airport layout plan, the shoreline master plan, transportation master plan, sewer master plan, and water master plan. Your planning commission reviews for consistency each of these documents as they are updated during the comp plan cycle. Fortunately, most of these planning documents are the initial responsibility of others. Now, the state requires local comprehensive planning across a minimum of the following 7 elements: land use, housing, parks and recreation, capital facilities, transportation, utilities, economic development, and other elements can be added as the local need arises. Now, while Washington is not a top-down planning state, our local comp plan process does not occur in a bubble. There are significant components which have to be addressed in order for regional and state agencies to certify our plan. Perhaps the most significant of these conditions is the requirement for population absorption. The state develops population growth projections. A portion of these are passed on to Snohomish County. The county, in turn, assigns growth numbers to individual jurisdictions. A good deal of our planning energy is focused around how and where the city is this growth is going to happen. Growth is not optional. Effective management of that growth is. Land use issues are fundamental to successfully implementing the vision contained in our comp plan. The city is vested with broad authority over land and use regulated actions, such as design standards and critical area regulation. This powerful regulatory tool should be wielded with wisdom and caution. Mistakes are hard to rectify. Our land use code, AMC Title 20, needs to be both consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and internally consistent. Title 20 is really extensive. With each 8-year comp plan update and with each annual update, we need to make sure that the code remains consistent with the comp plan. This is the critical relationship between the comp plan and the land use code. In cases of conflict, the comp plan rules. And other regulatory documents fall out of the land use code and also need to be consistent with the vision contained in the comprehensive plan. Our design standards and mixed use development code fall into this category. These regulations are also within the review responsibility of the Planning Commission. In conclusion, It is our job to make sure from a citizen's perspective that the city is moving in the direction determined by council. We are here to advise council on issues related to land use and the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission does not carry out its responsibilities in a vacuum. We rely on professional staff as primary, but not sole source of information and opinion. We also look into other planning agencies and jurisdictions across the country to see what they're doing to solve challenges similar to ours. In the process, we have discovered that there are a lot of smart people grappling with problems very similar to ours. We paid careful attention to staff recommendations, but based on the insight gained from other jurisdictions and our own experience, maintain the ability to question those recommendations. As a result of the time we spend over a span of years, we are able to examine comprehensive plan and land use issues with the discipline born of experience, research, and ongoing professional staff input. Please keep in mind that the planning horizons are long. The Growth Management Act requires a minimum of 20-year planning updated every 8 years. The Planning Commission is typically looking out further than that. The practical effect of these long planning timelines is that we are often guided along paths set by previous councils with no effective mechanism to update the current council in the 7 or 8 intervening years between comp plan updates. Based on recent council decisions, we think there is a communication gap between council and planning commission. Without effective updating mechanisms or a functional feedback loop, the commission is often left to speculate about the intent and rationale of council relating to the vision contained in the comprehensive plan. Allow us to suggest a few possible remedies to make sure that we reflect the intent of council in our deliberations. Every commission decision related to land use or the comp plan is forwarded to council with a summary, findings of fact, and a recommendation. The findings reflect more about why the decision is appropriate and consistent than why it's a good idea. Perhaps we could include more information about arguments both pro and con that led to the decision. This might allow council to see beyond the recommendation to the supporting documents and research which led to the commission to its conclusion. The next comp plan update will be due in 2024. We will be starting soon on discussions about the next vision for our city. Most of those discussions will ultimately reflect the vision of the current council, perhaps for the duration of the 2024 comp plan update process. We can somehow maintain a periodic dialogue with council to make sure we are planning a path consistent with council's direction. There will likely be one or more planning focus groups, stakeholders, citizens, and staff as we move through the comp plan update. It might be helpful if we were to form one of these focus groups with council as a whole to participate in the ongoing comp plan decisions. Again, thank you for letting us speak here today, and I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Those were, I think, some excellent suggestions in your remarks in terms of how we can improve communication and flow of vision between the council and the commissions. I'm also very impressed by the scope of work. Knowing one of the planning commissioners very well, can tell you there are hundreds of hours of research and documentation and learning that go into serving on our planning commission. So we all owe you a debt of gratitude for that. Thank you. Don't see any questions in the chat yet. No? Okay, let's move on to the Parks, Arts, and Recreation Commission roles. And for that, I'll turn it over to the Chair of Parks, Arts, and Recreation, Heather Logan.
Thank you, Mayor Tolbert, Administrator Ellis, City Council, Planning Commission, Arlington staff, and fellow members of Parks Commission. It's nice to see you all tonight. So as you know, if you didn't know before, you know now, the city adopted the updated Arlington Comprehensive Plan in December of 2015. This is our main planning document for guiding growth and development for the next 20 years. Believe it or not, there was one thing that Tim didn't mention. There's also a park and recreation master plan. And that is where the comp plan gets all of its details for parks, arts, and recreation. So our work goes into that plan that you approve. The Parks Commission is codified in section 2.04.050 of Arlington's Municipal Code. Our planning process is detailed in the Park and Recreation Master Plan, which provides direction for the planning, acquisition, development of new facilities, including parks, renovation of parks, open space, recreation facilities, and recreation programs for the years 2016 to 2023. The role of the Park Commission is an advisory board to the mayor and to city council. We are your research team. Our responsibilities include making recommendations for improvements and changes to the 17 parks in 248 acres and 8 miles of trails. We tour every park every year. It's actually rather fun. You might think about coming. I did not know we had 17 parks when I joined, and there's some real beautiful gems tucked away in Arlington. We plan for future park and recreational facilities and programs. We monitor the 48 pieces of public art. We make recommendations for new public art and make recommendations for the art strategic plan. We monitor the heritage tree program. There's 11 trees in it. They're all just gorgeous. And we monitor the city's overall tree canopy and other tree programs. An example would be the Arbor Day program. We receive input from service area residents. We identify needs for improvement, identify opportunities for partnerships, assess potential funding sources, and we update our master plan. Our priorities, as detailed in our plan and approved by City Council, include renovating Howler Park, which is now completed, continued development of County Charm Park, which is stalled for lack of funding, and acquiring park and recreation space in Smoky Point. Acquiring park and recreation space in Smoky Point has been a park priority since 2007. Our work intersects with the Planning Commission in that the comp plan specifies that new parks, especially neighborhood parks, be dedicated and constructed within development areas by implementing the requirements in the land use codes. And so, as you can tell, there's a lot of structure and process that goes into what we do, how it intersects with planning, and how it eventually gets up to City Council for your consideration. What all of this means is that when the Park Commission makes the recommendation to City Council that meets one of the specified priorities from the council approved plan, and if council votes no, we are left to wonder if there's a communication gap, or if you change the plan and we don't know it, or just where the train came off the tracks. We welcome your input and questions. We do a lot of different tours in a year. You're welcome to join us. And we would like to have further meetings like this one to ensure consistency of goals so that we don't have surprises in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I'm certainly hope all the council members are getting the vision of how structured we are in our planning processes and how fortunate we are that there are volunteers who are our research arm and who spend a lot of time engaging in the plans to make the vision for the city come to life. I have a couple of questions in the chat, and the first one is for the Planning Commission. And the question is, am I correct in that I hear that you say that the planning commissioners are citizens that are engaged in community service, while council members are more political? I appreciate the suggestions for the council to communicate more often and more clearly with Planning Commission regarding findings. I'm not sure I heard that in the presentation, but I'll let planning address the question.
Thank you. If I understand the question correctly, we are actually just volunteers that are appointed by you, Madam Mayor. So we are, as part of the commission, we're not elected officials, but I'm trying to get to the core of the question. Could you repeat it perhaps?
Yeah, I thought, so am I correct in that I hear you say planning commissioners are citizens that are engaged in community service, while council members are more political?
On a short answer, yes.
Short answers are good. The next question is for parks, and it's how do they project and consider future needs of parks?
That would be a very long answer. As you go through the park plan, you can see we keep a running list of what's accomplished, what's pending. Country Charm would be an example, and what our current priorities are. And so as the city develops, we do a lot of brainstorming, we talk to people and we say, you know, what's going on? Through the incredibly marvelous support from Sarah Lopez, we get a lot of inside information. For example, that Jensen Park is hugely used. It has wonderful facilities, open space. Parents can sit in comfort on a bench and see their kids for, I think that park's like an acre or more for the whole space. And what they want there, even though it's a beautiful facility, they want a real bathroom because all these little kids are there, and a porta potty, we've all been in them. They're not always as one would wish, is one way to put it. And so that's what they want. They don't need more or different park. They need a bathroom. So that's something we're considering. I guess the shorter answer is we do the work, we get out there, we tour the parks, we talk to people, we look at what's new in development. Where would more park space or open space or a tree make a difference in the quality of life in Arlington?
Great. So another question for parks, it's, do you consider the needs of neighborhoods as they send requests, as you send requests to council?
Of course. Is there more to the question so I could give a longer answer?
I can ask that Deborah Nelson to explain. It was her question. Maybe she could give you a little bit more context for it.
Well, Heather, I think you actually answered it with your example of Jensen. Is you listened to the neighborhood. And I guess that's what I was just wondering is, as you go on the tours, I mean, I went on one, but it was 10 years ago. But as you go on the tours, are you kind of canvassing the neighborhood to say, what do you want? What do you need? We've got these ideas. What do you think of those? So I was curious about how much your communication with the different neighborhoods, because Arlington has so many different neighborhoods.
Totally agree. It does have a lot of neighborhoods. You know, I've only been on the commission for a year, and so I have never personally knocked on a door, but maybe Britt could help us out with that. The other thing is Sarah gets contacts from people and she tells us what's coming into the city and things we need to consider, and we can compare it to the plan and say, yeah, that fits right in. Let's keep it up there. Or, oh, that's new. Or no, that's not what council approved for this plan, and we would not be able to move forward on that. Britt, do you want to take a stab at Commissioner Nelson's question? Thank you.
Yeah. So I know for me personally, just for some background, I've been on the commission for 8.5 years. So I just started my 3rd term in April. I find the best way for me to do my research and feel like I'm making the best decisions for the community is I take my kids to the parks as often as possible. So like Jensen, for example, is a park that I frequent with my kids and talk to other parents and ask, you know, what do you need? What changes could we make here that would make this better? I do know that we spend a lot of time looking over the documents that are coming in for future growth in the community as well. You know, if we know that there's a lot of housing going in a certain area, then we need to look at that area again and figure out, is the parks in that area meeting those new citizens or new homeowners' needs, or do we need to look at adding something new or making changes to the existing parks to better meet the needs of those that are in that area? Does that answer your question, Deborah?
That's great.
Yes, perfect.
Great
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have another question, and this one is probably to both councils. Would it help if when the council votes no on a recommendation to approve from the Planning Commission? Is there more to that question, Jessica?
Actually, that was mine, Barb.
Jan, is there more to that
Okay.
question?
Well, maybe I didn't say it right. So when the Planning Commission sends us a proposal that they have approved and the council votes no, would it help if the people who voted no expressed in the minutes why they voted no? Would that help the Planning Commission understand and the Parks Commission understand?
But we throw that one to the staff members of the Parks and Planning Commission first. Mark, do you want to address that?
Certainly, yeah, I think it would be very helpful to know the reasons behind a denial of a proposal. It certainly saves us from going back and having to assume the reasons behind that. We may have a good idea of as why, but yeah, when we have information that leads us, gives us definite reasons behind a decision that's being made, then it allows us first to adjust to that and provide for additional information if need be. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah, what do you think?
So watching the meeting that's in question, I think it was pretty clear what the council's thoughts were. I think it might be helpful before the council meetings that there would be discussion between the members of PARC or Planning Commission about the topic instead of having the discussion at the actual council meeting.
That's very wise, Sarah. We do at council, we have a workshop before we have any meeting where we take an action. And that certainly would have been great to surface concerns during that workshop. So that way the staff could have taken them back to the commissions and given them a chance to address those concerns or at least understand them before the vote was taken.
I think Don had that question also, where he asked if representatives from the commission be present to represent their concerns. That probably could have been helpful if there were members of PARC and planning at that workshop.
Yeah, again, I do think council has a responsibility to surface their concerns in the workshop so that the commissions then have a chance to schedule to be there to address them. So I have another question. Councilmember Stickles appreciates the idea of PARC and planning having joint meetings with the council at least 2 times per year. Paul and I also think it's a good idea that the commissions are doing so much work and so much research on behalf of me and the council that we would love to give you the opportunity to engage in that work with us or have us engage with you. So would the 2 commissions be open to meeting jointly with the council? And maybe it's just a big meeting like this and maybe it's past COVID and we can all be in actually the same room.
Dream on.
So somebody send me an email if you have any objections to that. I think that the council has their annual planning retreat in April of every year, and it would certainly be valuable to meet with our commissions before we go into those visioning sessions. And besides, we want all the great ideas you guys can bring to us to make our city even better. So Don Vanny had a follow-up to Deborah's question in regards to York Park, which we weren't going to talk about any specific projects tonight, but I'll ask the question anyway. He wanted to know if anyone asked the neighborhood about the park being expanded or surplused.
Sarah or Britt, does one of you remember the history on York Park?
I know that we've been working on it being the commission's vision to surplus that property for about the last 3 years, I would say. It's been in talks a bit longer than that. I know personally in the times that I've either been at that park for personal visit or on park tours, a lot of the people that we have seen there, which is few, aren't from that neighborhood or community. There's not many kids on that street that are utilizing that as a neighborhood park. So I think that was a big push to go ahead and try to not expand the park, but rather push to get that area surplused. Because there isn't really a need for extra park space there at this time.
I can share that when I was doorbelling that neighborhood during an election campaign, I did not hear anything good from the neighbors about the park. There was a lack of kids in the neighborhood who used it. In fact, they were more complaining about teenagers being in the park or wanting the city to do something. So, and I've been out there several times on graffiti cleanups and I can personally attest to the graffiti problems in that park. Okay, now you're raising your hands, but I'm going to call on you, but I'm going to ask you to at least raise your hand on the screen. So in case you're not on my screen. So I see Heather and then Deborah and then Jan.
So one of PARC's priorities for York isn't just more park where there's already park. the priority is to have another park in another part of Smoky Point. There's all those neighborhoods on the east side of Smoky Point Boulevard. They all loop through there and they don't have any public spaces. And I don't know that our park would go right there. But the point is, regardless of what York's history was or who's using it and not, we didn't just want more park where there is park and continue to have none where there's none.
I'll mention just for clarification that if you read our parks master plan, you'll notice that we have parks that are not finished. So we have parks that are identified that have amenities or uses in them that have not been fully built out. York is not one of them. York was built out to the what it was intended to be. The extra property was listed as phase 2, but there was never a plan for phase 2 that I'm aware of.
Also, if you look at the definitions in the comp plan, and this is something we should all be familiar with, there is a different definition for a neighborhood park versus a community park versus a regional park. And they serve different purposes to serve different population groups. And so that's probably important to know. Deborah.
I was just going to reply to Dawn's question. And yes, Dawn, I've doorbelled out there twice, about my second term, and nobody was interested in that park. They kept asking me what I would do to get rid of that house that's abandoned. And then I went out 3 years ago or so when this first came up to the previous council, and I heard the same thing, that they didn't really care about the park, want the park as it was. So yes.
And as Paul often says, city shouldn't own the worst looking house in the city. Jan?
Well, actually, Deborah said what I was going to say. When this came up the first time several years ago, I did go down to the neighborhood and I did go door to door and talk to people. And yes, they have a concern. They wanted the old house gone. They weren't interested in expanding the park. And most of that was because they are in a neighborhood where there wasn't the parking for additional cars, or they didn't want more cars coming down their streets. So to be honest, I never found one household, and I spent a lot of time down there, that wanted to expand the park. I did mention at that time they were looking at duplexes, and they were fine with that. They thought, great, it would look better than what was there. And I never had one single person say they wanted to expand the park.
Thank you, Jan. So we're coming up close to that hard end time that I talked about. So before we get to the end of the meeting, I want to really thank both the Planning Commission and the Parks Commission. I know me and the council highly value the work you do and the way you look out for the vision of the city and actually work towards accomplishing that for us. And the amount of hours as volunteers you put into getting engaged and reading the documents and the long convoluted planning process. I do think that we could all benefit from better communication, and we will take a lead role in structuring that in a way that fits your volunteer schedules as well. So we ensure that it happens every year. And I think multiple times a year is probably a good idea. So thank you for the work. I'm happy that every one of you that was appointed, we're happy about that. Keep up the good work and give us a chance to communicate a little bit better with it. Right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally edited it.
Yeah, she did the last 30 seconds.
He was talking about nothing was coming on the screen, so.